BBC Radio Cumbria Sport.
Yeah, hello again. Welcome along to BBC Radio Cumbria Sport between now and 7. With just me tonight. Unfortunately, Chris can't make it this evening, but the main thing is we have got our guest with us this evening. It is the Carlisle United head coach, Chris Beech, who I'm delighted to say will be joining us over the next 55 minutes. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Look, we're kind of moving towards a bit more semblance of normality at the moment. Does it feel as though you're kind of the way things were pre-lockdown?
Well, to be honest with you, yeah, I've been, we've got to be careful how we go about business, of course, because of all the restrictions, etc., between what's classed as employed and looking at, obviously, trying to do our best, looking after the club and looking at recruitment. So it's been a testing time, but it's, same could be said for a lot of listeners. It's been very, very difficult for a lot of people.
It is, I guess, how easily or otherwise people can deal with something like that. For you personally, I know obviously you've had your family around you, but how tough was that lockdown period?
Well, homeschooling was really tough. But
tell me about it. Yeah.
No, there's been some good things come out of it as well, I think. And I'll be honest, when the world, and it is now starting to open back up to, like you said, what would be classed as a little bit more normality, I'd like to think a lot of us will appreciate a lot of things in the future a lot more. But it's been great having some real solid family time, plenty of walking, lots of phone calls. But yeah, it's been good.
I mean, it is an uncertain time for everybody in all walks of life, and certainly that will be the case. It will be a nervous time for footballers, particularly lower down the Football League pyramid, because I guess there's no guarantee they're necessarily going to have clubs next season.
No, I feel for the players. I suppose I become almost delivering bad news and reality of the situation. But when there's far in workforces, there's people getting laid off, made redundant. Businesses are in reduced workforces, and then they come out with the outcome of we actually had too many people working for us anyway, and our turnover was actually still pretty good. There's all sorts of things happening out there in the world. So we're very fortunate to work in football. We're very fortunate to represent Carlisle doing that. And we've got to really appreciate that. And like I said before, even with family values, I think coming out of this, it's been a massive reset button to a lot of things that goes on in a fast, modern, non-resting world. It's constant, isn't it? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Shopping, Trafford Centre. It weren't too long ago where Sunday was very quiet, and you used to go and pick your dad up from the pub to go and have a game of football on a Sunday afternoon. But and that was in a certain hour as well. It wasn't all day, and definitely no happy hour. But there you go.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning then, because we want to talk through your development through the game as well. Maybe some aspects that people don't necessarily get to hear from a manager. Just going back to the very beginning, born in Blackpool. Of course. What was family life like for you back then, Chris?
Well, I've just mentioned Sundays there. So, yeah, it was good. It was great. I was very lucky to have good parents. Still have. I'm fortunate that I'm well supported that way. But, yeah, I enjoyed my upbringing in Fleetwood. I was born at Blackpool Vic. Just enjoyed from a hard-working family's point of view, a real good childhood, constantly out playing football, doing what we all did in them days, and I just always wanted to be a professional football player from a young age. So it's pretty dedicated and single-minded to try to achieve that as a young boy.
Were there footballers in the family then? Was your dad a player at all?
Yeah, he'd say he was the best. There was my dad, my two uncles. They all played for Fleetwood at the same time. So there were big connections with obviously Fleetwood Town Football Club because of that. And to be fair, my Uncle Dave he was honoured in terms of being associated with the club, because he was part of it when it folded and re-established not too far ago before sort of Andy Pilley took over. So he gets he's invited to every home game as it stands today. So the family was honoured that way, I suppose. But I used to love watching Fleetwood Town play as a young boy, while I was a schoolboy playing for Blackpool, and I'd actually try and avoid watching Blackpool to watch Fleetwood play, actually. But yeah, it was great. But I was just a young lad, and my dad and my uncles playing, and of course when they're too old to play, and they've been in that pub too many times on that Sunday, and they hang their boots up, I'd still watch Fleetwood even when I was like 15, 16, trying to become a professional at Blackpool. And Fleetwood had a good team. There was some good players at that time. Steve McCauley, Phil Clarkson, they had good careers. Andy Lyons, they all came through a non-league situation and had good careers.
Were you always a midfielder then? Was that always your position from an early age?
Pretty much, yeah. From being sort of the age of 7, you start playing for the under-9s locally, and kind of, I just love working hard, trying to get a goal, and I try my best to be the best at it. But it's funny how you look at yourself, and even comparing it with my brother. I ended up being fortunate enough to play in the Championship, and like a few weeks ago, you guessed Kev. I played with Kevin Gray at Huddersfield, and I managed to get like 10 goals in one season at Championship standard from midfield. But I still look at myself as a failure because I didn't get where I wanted to go, which was the Premier League. So it's amazing, really. But my brother had scored for Ossett or Fleetwood or in a Farsley Celtic, and he'd be dining out on that for the next 6 months. Like it's funny. It's funny how you could be from the same family and so different yet the same.
When you joined Blackpool, when they first approached you, did you have options of other teams to join, or was it always Blackpool?
Well, it was funny, really. Fleetwood never really. It's a small town, and it never really had an association with professional footballers. And God rest his soul, there was a chap called Billy Ronson who played for Blackpool and Barnsley, a little blonde midfield player. And I played like schoolboy non-league football, and his brother helped my dad coach our team. And he actually then, when he stopped playing professionally in England, played for Baltimore Blasts, and they had like a 6-a-side league in America. And he was telling me he used to come down like a spaceship and all the razzmatazz for football. So when he come over to see his brother, he just took me on a field and had a look at me because he'd heard good things about me, and he just then rang his friend up. I think it was Jack Chapman at Blackpool, and just said, "Listen, there's a 13, 14-year-old Fleetwood lad. He's got a bit about him. Why don't you have a look at him?" And that's actually that's how I signed for Blackpool as a schoolboy.
Was it pretty old school then in terms of your development as a young player coming in that dressing room? Because many of the guests who get on the show, like Paul Simpson quite recently, he said it as well. He said the stuff that went on there as a young pro, you just wouldn't have got away with it these days.
No, you wouldn't. And it's a shame because it'd be classed as possibly abuse or discriminative behaviour or things like that. And we do live in a modern world where we do have to have an awareness of other people's thoughts. We 100% do. But at the same time, there's some great lessons to be had if the heart and the mind's in the right place behind it. And that now is a real big balancing act for coaches, especially in the youth development, because we generally don't really relay too much bad news to people anymore or deal with things. I mean, as a young boy at 14, joining Blackpool, getting the tram from Fleetwood to Blackpool to go training on your own, to join a young group of people who would be all locally based, but be pre-academy. So there might be there was 5 or 6 14-year-olds, 6 or 7 15-year-olds, 7 or 8 16-year-olds. But when I look at them group of people, when we used to train at Squires Gate on grass next to the wooden hut with one floodlight, so you've only got an area where you can see of about 40 by 30, nearly every one of us actually had a career. And now in academies, you've got like a good 20 lads in each age group ultimately there's probably only one or two at best in each group. But there's a massive chasm now of people available to be what would be classed as young professional footballers. And some of it's really good, and some of it's, you'd argue against it, because in my age groups, like myself and Kevin Sharp and Jamie Forrester, but they all went on to play. Above me is Mark Bonner and Andy Gowk, and Trevor Sinclair was 16 then, and we were just training all together in one group. And at the time, I remember the youth team manager saying, like, at 14, playing in the youth team on a Saturday, and he'd be using language like, while you've got something, how can I put this now on radio? While you've got a hole in your backside, you're never ever going to make a footballer. And I remember getting a tram home, crying on the tram, thinking, and you go home and tell your dad, and he'd just go like, well, he's right. Deal with it. Get better. Work harder. And that was it. There was no like, let's have a meeting with a coach, and he can't speak to my son like that. And there was none of that going on. And some of it is good, but and some of it, obviously isn't so good, especially now. But there's still a way of doing it, and there's still a way of getting that right. But yeah, that was kind of, I suppose, what Paul might have related to, the kind of harshness of, I'm thinking I'm 14 playing against 18-year-olds, and no wonder I can't get anywhere near him. And my coach is telling me, like, you're pretty much done before you've even started.
What are your memories of your debut then, your pro debut for Blackpool, and how you actually found out you were going to be playing?
It's a good question. Surreal. So I'm coached by Neil Bailey, top bloke. Went on to have an unbelievable career, Premier League. Well, he actually left Blackpool to go to Manchester United, because we'd often beat the class of 92. Well, they weren't the class of 92 at that time, because none of them were famous, but we'd beat them. So Neil actually got headhunted to leave Blackpool and become Manchester United's coach with Eric, that would have helped that team. But I ended up making my debut with my youth coach. I played against Port Vale, last game of the season. I think there was a bit of a car crash on the motorway. The lads were okay, thankfully, but there was a few players down. I was due to make my debut anyway, but it meant Neil Bailey had to take his suit off, get changed, and I made my professional debut with my youth coach, who's been shouting at me every day for 2 years. And next minute, I stood next to him on Bloomfield Road in front of 9,000, and Mark and Ian Taylor and Robbie van der Laan. I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing here with my youth coach? But it's amazing. But that was my debut, and yeah, that was my first full debut with Blackpool. And it's funny actually. Now, Neil became Manchester United's youth coach with Eric, and involved with obviously Sir Alex, etc. But when Eric Cantona got suspended for his kung fu kick, Sir Alex organised some friendlies with local teams to get him match fit behind closed doors, because he weren't allowed to play, was he, for 8-9 months or something like that. And one of them was against Blackpool. And I actually played at the Cliff, marking Eric Cantona as an 18, 19-year-old.
Wow.
He's like Eric's, but I'm not doing a French accent, but Eric's, and like that's his ball. There's nothing I could do about it with that barrel chest he had. And I had to actually drive Neil's club car back to Blackpool after the game. So he's been headhunted by Man United. I've gone to play Manchester United behind closed doors, mark Eric Cantona, and drive my old youth team manager's car back to the ground at Bloomfield Road after it had finished. Can you imagine one of our 18-year-old lads doing that? Can you imagine Taylor Charters doing that right now?
How good was he, Eric Cantona? Getting that close up to him on a pitch, could you tell how good he was?
I think I got nearer to him when I'd gone down the M55 in Neil's car, to be honest with you. But it was good. Obviously, it was a friendly type game, but it was a week or two before he could get back and play for Man U. And because Eric played, because he's Eric, Sir Alex actually supported the reserve. So the actual team, they had like Andy Cole and Ryan Giggs playing in the same game. So it was like, because Eric's playing, I better make sure there's a few of the lads playing with him. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, Sam Allardyce was manager he would have been there for a couple of seasons, was he, when you were playing? What was he like to play for?
Yeah. Sam was pretty radical at the time, because because at the time the lads would still meet Thursdays, 6 pints, play pool, snooker. Obviously, I'm 18, coming into a big dressing room that's got like Mike Davis, Paul Groves, Andy Garner, Trevor Sinclair's 18, Big Dave Bamber, David Ayres, Gary Briggs. Wow, what a tough player he was. So it's pretty daunting at that time to get involved with these lads. But Sam then changed it over a little bit and changed the way, you were allowed to have a pint, but you weren't allowed to have one for 2 hours after a game. And we'd have to finish a game and walk over to the Tangerine that's not there anymore now. And you had to eat pasta. And everyone was like, pasta? Eat pasta? Yeah, you had to eat pasta, drink water. We had to stay there for an hour and a half after the match. And then you were allowed like a bottle of Beck's or whatever you were after then, or a pint of whatever they were on, the lads at the time. So that's what Sam did. He brought in things like creatine that nobody'd ever heard of. And he just tried to like modernise traditional values of how you prepare for games. Very, statistics and strategies. So, yeah, and I used to play a sweeper away, actually, for one season for him, which was easy, because I had, I think, Andy Morrison and somebody like Ian Gore used to just try and eat their opponent. So I used to just play behind them and get on the ball, and I could look like Jared for half an hour and just play like so free and comfortable and mature and get a 9 out of 10 in the paper. And then at home, I'd play in midfield. But I played a lot of games, but I never really felt I belonged, even though I'd played. It was edging up to 100 games for him. Yeah. And then my contract finished, and again, relating to old school traits, Sam got me in. Chris, I'm going to give you a new contract. I think I was on a couple of £100 at the time. Lads are earning good money, 3-4 times as much as at the time. And Sam said, listen, I'm going to give you £50 a week more. And I'm like, really? I've played like 100 games, Sam. He's like, well, you can either take it, or he actually said, something off. So I'm sat across the table and I'm like, serious? You can either take this contract or do one in more different terminology. So I was like, wow. So like, my dad was sat with me because there's no agents then. And my dad's a builder, and he said, listen, just a bit of parity on a building site. Yeah, we all might all not get the same amount, but you got to be like in and around, or, some lads are getting 4 or 5 times as much. He said, you can sign it or do one. So that's how I ended up leaving Blackpool. I did one.
Just before we leave Blackpool, of course, the club was owned at the time by Owen Oyston. It was the start of the Oystons' fairly long stewardship and fairly controversial stewardship of Blackpool. What was that like? What were they like? Did they have much involvement, Owen, on the football side of things?
Yeah, he was very hands-on in his early days at Blackpool. Really was. He'd have his big sheepskin coat on and his big sort of hat. He'd often he'd often speak to my mum and dad and parents, and he was quite accessible in his unique way. And he actually did invite, under Sam's era, when Phil Brown helped Sam as player assistant manager, we actually went to his house and we were clay pigeon shooting and doing all sorts, on 4x4s and archery, and all in his grounds up in Lancaster Way. He was a little bit like that, but we all know that he's definitely a ducker and a diver and a business person. And we obviously know that a lot of the Seasiders, the fans, don't have any rapport with Owen. But in terms of that era, that time, and the way it was pretty accessible, and just did his thing the way he does it. But I was only a young man, but it was quite a surreal experience looking back, actually.
Yeah, interesting character. So you left Blackpool 1996 then. What offers were on the table? Were there opportunities to go to a number of clubs at that point?
Yeah, there was a few. So with playing so many games, being so young, you're obviously going to get some interest. I went and I had a meeting. I scored for Blackpool against Crewe. I had a meeting with Dario at Crewe. He had people like Danny Murphy, Collins, people like that playing at the time. And he just said to me, "Listen, I like you, Chris, but I can see you playing more as a fullback in the meeting." And I was a little bit like taken aback because, all right, I played one season for Sam away from home as sweeper, but always been a central midfield player. But it came out of the meeting a little bit confused. So I wasn't sort of like all in to try and sign for them. I got a few calls from Northwest clubs, and I got a call from Keith Ouchin, who just got his first job at Hartlepool, and his enthusiasm sort of bowled me over. And we all can relate to his goal that he scored against Tottenham, can't we, in the FA Cup, that diving header. And I don't know, after meeting him, they actually given me a signing on fee as well. So I was like, wow, I can treat myself to a car and crack on in life. And I ended up signing for Hartlepool, which was League Two. Everybody told me not to go. Don't go. Don't do it. And it was probably the best thing I did, because I went up there and started to understand who I was as a player and what I can try and do and achieve, because I didn't want to really play lower end League Two football for the rest of my career. And I managed to sort myself out in terms of understanding my strengths, which was to try and be fitter and competitive and more than my opponent, but the composure and capabilities of scoring goals. And I started scoring one every 4 games for about 2.5 seasons for Hartlepool.
Who were some of the more well-known names in the dressing room during that period at Hartlepool?
Well, there was some well-known, and I remember coming up to Carlisle, but I think I mentioned it when we spoke last time in interview, but there was like Joe Allen, but Joe Allen at the end of his career. I know Joe did great in the middle of his career, scoring loads of goals for Hartlepool, but Joe was at the end. There was people starting out like Steve Howard, who went on to play for Leicester, and Tommy Miller, people like that. So there was myself. We always managed to produce a goal-scoring midfield player. So it became my 2.5 years, and then Tommy took over me when I left, and Huddersfield bought me. Tommy kind of started doing it for Hartlepool, and it was kind of like big Steve Howard. Would you believe, was actually a centre midfield player? Ended up a centre forward, didn't he? But he was a big lad, big boy, Steve. But yeah, there was some good players.
Yeah, I think Stephen Halliday was coming through at that point, and he moved on to Carlisle United. He was one of those players who seemed to have all the talent, yet maybe not the application to have got him as high as he should have gone.
Well, he was always on and off to go to Sunderland, and it was always big discussions for every game we played in. I think it was Sunderland. He might have started there or something like that and come to Hartlepool, and there was always mentions of transfer fees and stuff. But he had ability, but a little bit misdirected, and he didn't quite get it all right, did he? And it comes back to them traits we were talking about at the start of the interview, and how the mind, the body only ever follows the brain. You got to make sure you know what you want to try and do, and the body will follow that. But if you can't get that right, you're pretty much looking for a lot of luck, or pretty much it's not really going to happen. And it's difficult because there's a lot of different factors come into play. But Stephen didn't quite do what everybody thought he would do. I think he didn't quite get it right, but he was a good lad, a good player, but it didn't quite happen for him.
Another Carlisle United link as well is a former player, Mick Tate, who took over the manager's job as well. What was he like to play for?
Well, Mick's a silent assassin, isn't he? Comes from definitely the era we were talking about in terms of, he'd break his leg and not know he had and carry on. It's just the way Mick was. I think he was Keith's assistant manager at the time I signed and became player manager, and I played with Mick in the same Hartlepool team. It was a good experience, but Mick was, he didn't say a lot, led by example. He must have been about 40 then when he was still like player manager, and just got on with it. Never ever moaned or had an excuse for anything. it is what it is. Let's make the best of it, and that were Mick Tate, really.
When did the opportunity to move to Huddersfield come about for you then?
Well, this one's a little bit strange. So I've signed for Hartlepool. I played in midfield with Mark Cooper, actually, not Forest Green's manager. He signed Mark. So I played. And who else came up there? Michael Brown came on loan, actually, from Man City. His parents are from that area. But I played a good 2.5 years. Well, 2 seasons, 2-year contract. But ended up winning all the sort of player of the season type things. Getting me always tried to try and get double figures on the goals tally as a midfield player. And my contract comes up for renegotiation, and it actually fell into the first year the Bosman came out in England. So I was 23, turning 24, and nobody really knew the rules and regs, the procedures. Like, do you go your free transfer on your birthday? Is it the end of the season? Do you sign a contract and what? Nobody really knew the details of it. They just knew it was all coming in. So I got offered a new contract, but ironically, Hartlepool offered me less than what I was already on, having been top goal scorer in one of the seasons and won the trophies. But that's what just happened in them days. And so I didn't sign the contract and ended up signing a week-to-week contract for Mick Tate. But I ended up then getting into that season and used to sign for 7 days and then re-sign every Friday so you could play on the Saturday. And I think I'd scored about 9 goals by November of that season, something like that. And I turned 24 in September, so I was thinking, do I then go for free at that point, or how's it all work? But it turned out it could be the end of the season. But I ended up on about 8 or 9 goals by... I was League 2 top goal scorer by about November. And Hartlepool every week started offering £50 a week more from the low wage it was. So like by the time we got to November, it was quite a good offer. But I knew at that point that Championship clubs, Sheffield United and teams like that who were high top 6 sort of Championship type clubs were interested. Bradford, Huddersfield, teams like that. So there's no way I was going to sign a contract and remove the opportunity to try and play higher. And I ended up actually straining my groin a little bit on the Friday. And previously, Hartlepool had sold a player to Sheffield United, again a goal-scoring midfield player called I think it's called John Cullen. John Cullen, and they paid a lot of money for him, but they then wanted to do a deal and swap him back for me, maybe a year later. But they'd not paid all the money to Hartlepool for him because it was in structured type payment plan. So they're thinking, well, John's come up. He ain't really the standard we think. But Chris might be. Can we swap the player and just pay you slightly more money? And the club agreed to it. So I've got like the phone call on a Friday. My groin's sore. The phone call comes in. Sheffield United want you. Steve Bruce was manager, I think, at the time. Can you go and speak to them? We've sorted a deal out. So I go. Wow, ring me, Dad. From a telephone box, not a mobile phone. Get in the car to go and get me boots. And by the time I'd gone to get me boots, the club had changed their mind and then demanded £500,000 for me. So I was like, oh, wow. And they're already still paying for the previous player, and Sheffield United like, we ain't paying that for a League 2 player who's unproven. So it was like deal on, deal off. And I just said to Mick, I'm not in no state of mind to play tomorrow, and my groin's sore, you know it is. So I didn't play. And then Hartlepool took a stance of more or less sort of suggested that I'd done a Van Hooijdonk at the time and gone on strike, but that is not the club itself, the papers, and that wasn't the case at all. And that really hurt me, that, because it's opposite to who I am as a person. So I didn't actually play, and then I went back to Fleetwood and trained on my own for a little bit. And then when you could get to January and pre-sign for other clubs, that's when it heated up a little bit, and so I trained on my own. Didn't play for Hartlepool. Every week that went by, you're falling from first to second to fourth to fifth highest goal scorer, and it got to the stage where Hartlepool were like, right, we'll accept less than £500,000, and then I went to a tribunal where they decide how much you're worth. I actually went on trial at Huddersfield while I was still signed for Hartlepool. I played in a reserve game and scored. Peter Jackson was manager. And after the game, he said, I'm going to take you on loan because I can't buy you, because Huddersfield at the time were getting taken over. So the old chairman didn't want to pay for me. So I was in real, strange abyss, doing really well in League Two, could go to a championship club, played in a reserve game because you can on contract playing 2 games at that time. You could do that. Scored in that. They want me now to play for a championship team, and they can't agree a fee, so they actually took me on loan, and then I was on the bench. So I play on a Wednesday, and I'm in the championship on Saturday, sat on the bench at Barnsley, which was really surreal because on my Huddersfield debut. I'm sat on, well, not debut, I'm sub on loan from Hartlepool, and we're 6-0 down at half time. And we're playing in blue and white, and I'm thinking, Hartlepool currently playing Barnsley today, big Yorkshire derby. I'm sat there. Peter Jackson's got Terry York going wild, and I'm sat in the change room, and they just point at me and go, Beech and Delroy Face, he was in the young boy at the time. You two can go on. And we drew the second half 1-1. I think we got beat 7-1. I think it was that. And then I played the next 3 or 4 games and managed to get a goal or 2 on loan from Hartlepool in the Championship. Still getting paid the same amount at Hartlepool while on loan in the Championship. And then the loan finished. And then Hartlepool wouldn't... I think Huddersfield paid a loan fee. I think they paid £10,000 for a month. But they won't pay the transfer fee, obviously, because they still adamant on £500,000. And I ended up going back to Fleetwood, training on the beach on my own again. Mad. And then at the end of January, they could set a tribunal, sat in this football court, and it's amazing, really. The buying club who really rate you now tell everybody you're no good. And the club who wouldn't pay you enough, who try to get the most for you, you're the best player they've ever had since sliced bread. And you're just sat there listening to so they really want me, but only want to pay 50 grand. And Hartlepool, who won't pay me wages wise half decent compared to the other players, they're now saying he's the best player we've ever had in the history of Hartlepool. And you just they then leave the room and come back in it. And John Rudge was on the board and the FA and that, and they decide on a fee for you, and I think it was £60,000 straight away, and 35 after so many games or something like that. It was like £95,000, something like that.
Undersold you there.
And then he ended up signed for Huddersfield then, and played against Derby in the FA Cup 5th round. Was one of my first games. In front of 25,000 people at Huddersfield. It was. Managed to score in that as well, thankfully, but it was amazing.
Yeah, during your 4 years at Huddersfield, after Peter Jackson, of course, Steve Bruce took over, didn't he, as manager? What was he like to play for?
Yeah, he did, yeah. Well, I liked him. A lot of, like any manager, I would imagine some of the lads obviously have an opinion on me, but what I liked about him is he took over. The club got taken over as well. Hence, I was actually the first transfer. But then Steve came in and started signing everybody like Clive Wynard, Chris Luchetti, Kenny Irons, Scott Sellers, George Donis, and there was already Barry Horn, people like that in the team, in the squad. So paying a lot of money for fullbacks, 750 grand for Jamie Vincent. Who else do we have? Marcus Stewart was already there. Ben Thornley. So the squad was pretty. Kev was there, and that's when Kev sort of left. Really, when Steve got more dominant in his management. That's when Kev left Huddersfield. I actually, the squad of 23, my number was 22. So I knew where I was in the pecking order in terms of like new managers here. About 10 players got like pushed to the side. John Dyson was 23. He was a local lad from Huddersfield, and I was 22, just come from Hartlepool, and minimum payment in terms of transfer fee compared to all these other players. So I was easily from boardroom level, the one that shouldn't play in terms of finance investment. And this is why I respect Steve, because he'd play me after I earned respect out of him in front of players he'd paid £1 million for, and they're on good money. And he allowed me to do that. And I have no doubt at the time, understanding management at the boardroom, were like, you've just paid that for him, and why ain't he playing in front of Chris? And he just was like, well, he's doing a good job. So, and that allowed me to grow at that level of football.
Yeah, I think the owner of Huddersfield at the time, who sacked Steve Bruce after you just missed out on promotion, I think he didn't he blame Bruce for wasting millions of pounds on players?
Well, yeah, probably, but it happens like that. It happens all the time. You're often judged and sacked, and it's never on your successes. It's on every boardroom conversation becomes about how much money you've spent if they're not doing that well, whether it's a transfer fee or the wages. So that's just boardrooms. That's just what happens. But we were unfortunate, really. Steve was really frustrated because I remember playing at Man City Main Road. Steve's obviously Manchester United. We won 1-0. I managed to score the goal as a header, and from that day, Steve loved me because he was getting tons of stick from the City fans, obviously, coming from Manchester United. Joe Royle was Man City's manager, and we beat them 1-0. But Man City were first, I think, and we were second in the table, and it'd be around sort of November, December time, and we were a good few points clear of everybody. But what we did coming into the new year, the club decided to sell Marcus Stewart to Ipswich for about 3 or 4 million. Clyde, so Marcus is our top goal scorer on 15, 16 goals. Clyde had got about, 12 to 15, and I was on about 7 or 8. And we were like the lads who scored the goals for Huddersfield, trying to get in the Premier League. But we sold Marcus, or the club sold Marcus. Clyde had a car crash and then became not playable because he had to have a few operations because it was pretty bad. And I actually had, and I don't know how I got it because I was never quick, but I actually pulled my hamstring properly and was out for about 2 months. So the goals weren't then in the team, and we didn't recover from that point, and we only needed to win a couple of games in the last sort of 7 or 8 games, and we didn't do it, and we fell from the higher eclogues outside the playoffs. And I think Steve didn't recover that well. And again, pretty new to management himself at the time. And the following season didn't start very well, and he just left. That was it. Done.
Yeah, Lou McCarry took over after that, didn't he? And you went quite close in the playoffs again a couple of years later, beaten by Brentford, was it?
Yeah, I mean, what happened after that, all the big razzmatazz and investment, and Mr. Rubery, the chairman who took over, a chap called Malcolm Asquith, who was a local man, but very much like Andrew, actually, with all traditional traits and family values. And Malcolm, he tried to pass the club on to what would be considered, in his eyes, investment and the right people. And to be fair to Mr. Rubery, he did invest a lot of money. I mean, a lot. But he took it out of its comfort zone, which then, when he decided to leave, put Huddersfield in great danger and risk. And I actually didn't really play in the latter part of my Huddersfield career because I had a bad Achilles injury, which actually affected my whole career. I was about 27, something like that. So the club ended up getting relegated. I didn't play all season. Everybody we'd paid like 700-800 grand for, we'd sold. And by the time I got back fit, we were actually in League One, Lou's manager, and the club was, from a financial perspective, on a downward spiral because Mr. Ruby had decided to move on. And he wasn't now putting in his obviously a lot of money is private funds, and it was it outstretched itself, and I think Mick Wadsworth became manager. Actually, he did. He did, because I actually signed for Paul Simpson. Yeah, I left Huddersfield and signed for Paul.
Yeah, that was 2002, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Mick, I remember this because Lou tried to sell me to Hull while I was on crutches in my boot for my Achilles, and looking back, I should have gone, but I didn't because I'm injured, and I pretty, because I'd done pretty well in that period. I did know, because I scored a couple of goals against Derby, who were like a top 6 Premier League team at the time, with Jim Smith. I'd scored against Man City Main Road. I'd scored in some pretty high-profile games, and managed to get 10 goals that season. So, and then got injured and missed a full season. I knew at the time that Premier League, like Charlton were in the Premier League, Bradford were in the Premier League, they were like monitoring me and looking at me. Somebody had bidded for me and Steve had turned it down. It was Charlton bidded. I didn't know till I'd left that they'd done that, and they actually signed Matt Holland instead. But so I knew I was close to what I was trying to achieve and become a Premier League footballer. But spending a year out, I just felt I had to prove my fitness. So I didn't go to Hull when Lou's tried to obviously probably get me off the wage bill at the time, and stayed. But yeah, everything dismantled and downward spiraled, and I ended up meeting Paul at Rochdale and having a conversation with him and signed a 2-year contract. And about 10 minutes later, it got announced that Huddersfield have a new manager, and it was Mick. And he rang me up to say, I know you've had a bad 12 months, Chris, with injury and that, but I'd love you to stay. Can you come and have a chat? And I said, well, it's mad really now. I've just actually signed for Rochdale after Lou had released me. So it's strange.
But of course,
I've just signed, come out of Rochdale's office, just signed with Simo. And then Mick rings me up and goes, I'd love you to stay at Huddersfield. And I'm thinking, geez, I live 4 miles. I just bought a house in Old Firth. And he's like, Brandon had just been born. He's 1. And I just signed for Rochdale. Wow.
But of course, that was the start of a long relationship and a long stay with Rochdale as well. And I suppose you don't look back on that time at Scotland with any regrets, do you?
From a player's perspective, I didn't do that well. So I never recovered from my leg. And to be honest with you, with Paul, it's the kind of things I look out for now in terms of recruitment. Because on paper, at 28, 29, just recently goal scoring midfield player, you're a good acquisition for a club like that. But in reality, not knowing everything about and the injuries, etc., and I know you can't get everything right, but I probably helped Paul meet you guys at Carlisle because again, money. So he would have invested it from a wage perspective heavily in me, but I never really got going for him on the pitch. I think I played about 30, 35 games in 2 years, not one. And could never really play more than 3 or 4 games and be injured again. I just couldn't do it. My Achilles didn't work properly. The surgeon had cut the back of my heel off in terms of bone to alleviate a spur that I had. I couldn't actually put my football boot on for 12 months properly. It was horrible situation. But as a player, your mentality is to always give your best and try hard and give everything. And I tried to do it for Paul, but in terms of, I'll be very low on the best signings he's ever made as a manager, put it that way, on his list.
So at what point did you decide that you wanted to maybe move into coaching, and at what point did that opportunity present itself to you at Rochdale?
Well, it was strange, really. So I signed that 2-year contract as a player, but as a person, trying to give your best and not being able to give your best, it's pretty... I don't know if this is disabling in terms of like what you're trying to do. It's very hard on the mind because I'm always like to try and do the best I possibly can. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I'm thinking I physically can't do that, and it's not a nice. Sometimes in Father Time, you can get used to the idea of like this is happening to you. When it's taken away from you, it's very difficult to deal with while you then try to be an elite sportsman and do your best. It really is. And I found that period pretty hard. So I decided to start coaching at 29, 30, because I just felt as though if I can't be at my best as a player, I'll try and be at my best, and my body won't let me down as a coach, because it's all about the mind. And it started to let me down on the football pitch. So that's why I started to coach. But it's ironic, really, because I actually left Rochdale before I started coaching at Rochdale. And I actually started coaching at Bury, which is Rochdale's sort of, enemy as such in terms of in football teams. But I left Rochdale, and then I started coaching the under-12s at Bury. Just complete my A licence at 29. I had this big ambition to try and I tried to become the most qualified coach, the youngest, most qualified coach in the country, because I thought it might help me get a bit of kudos and get a decent job. So I just went on this massive drive, spending a lot of money, because it's quite expensive to do your badges and time consuming. And I just went down that road. And so I started with the under-12s, complete my A licence, and I got on the. It took me a couple of years to get on the pro licence, because at the time when the pro licence came out, it was very exclusive to Premier League managers at that point. And it took me a few years to try and get on that, but I did it when I was young. I did my certificate in applied management to football, which is at Warwick University. I did an academy managers course and went out to Braga, SC Braga. Completed my pro license. There's a good story in that, because Gianfranco Zola was on it, and he got the sack at West Ham, and we had to finish our tasks. So I actually invited him up to Rochdale because I was the youth team manager then, the academy manager, and he came down and he spent the week. He spent the week in Chorley, and we did our tasks, live tasks, and there was all sorts going on the internet in terms of him being up here. They're all like, is he going to be Bolton's next manager? Blackburn's next manager? I took him to my local Italian in Chorley, and I'm getting phone calls off my mates. Are you in Papa's with Gianfranco Zola? I'm like, yeah, I am, yeah.
How did you find him? Because there was always a feeling that, certainly at West Ham, during his time at West Ham, he was too nice a guy to be a manager. He wasn't ruthless enough.
Yeah, he was very, very such a gentleman. It was ironic, really. My dad picked him up from the hotel. He was staying off hotel near Botany Bay, the M62, and it was funny, really, because my dad's a man's man. Like, he's gone to pick him up, bring him I'm at home, walking round to the local restaurant, and he said, because we all do it, us English, don't we? We put on this foreign English accent, don't we? Yeah. Why do we do this when we speak to like foreign people?
We all do it. Yeah.
So my dad's going, Gianfranco, have you ever had ever drunk a pint, lager, pint? Thinking, Daddy speaks English, right? Leave him alone. And so he said he's not going to let him in the car till he's drunk his first pint. So he actually made him drink a pint of lager. And by the time he got to Papa's, like, he was half cooked off his first pint of lager he's ever had. He's probably had these fine red wines all his career and all, you know what I mean?
He won't forget that night, will he?
No, but there were like local chefs coming from different restaurants to come and see him and meet him, and it was surreal, weird.
In terms of your coaching then with Rochdale, you worked a long time alongside Keith Hill. Just how good was that fit between you two? Was it sort of good cop, bad cop, or was it a mixture of both?
You probably have better answers off the players, really. But originally, so my Bury youth team played Keith's youth team, who's Rochdale at the time. So we'd have, I managed to do quite a good job at Bury, taking over who was at the time Chris Casper, who became Bury's manager. And we managed to get like lads like Dale Stevens in that team, who now play for Brighton regularly in the Premier League, and David Worrell, who was top assist, wasn't he, in League Two last year for Port Vale, up there with Nicky Adams. Nicky Adams was a third-year scholar when I took over Bury's. I once sent Nicky off in training. He I've not been there long, and he's a third-year scholar, so he's like, they don't do it anymore. It's only 2 years, but then they did a third year to try and give the lads an extra year's worth of growth.
Mm.
But if you're a third-year scholar at Bury, you're pretty much in the first team or you've gone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Nicky's having a little goal in the first team with Cass, but he's been sent back to train with the youth team or whatever. So I've not been there that long as a youth team manager. We've got like Nicky, David Buchanan, Dale Stevens. There's some good players in that group, yeah. And like, I'm just pretty much getting going myself as a full-time coach. And Nicky's like, I'll beat you, cheat, no, he's cheeky. So I've give this decision. He's like, they've got this 18-year-old calling me a cheat. Who the hell does he think he is? I went, hey, Adams, get yourself off. And he's like, what are you on about? I said, get yourself off. Get yourself round that pitch over there where Casper's taking the first team, right? Run round that. Come back here. Think what you've called me. You can apologise to me when you get back here. And I might think about letting you back on this pitch. Or I'm not too sure, but off you go, son. Like, so Nicky does that little jog he does with his arms, and his little cheeky way he is, and off he went. And he went round Casper's pitch, and then the manager's like, "What are you doing, Adams?" Like, well, you bloody new youth coach. He's giving and he comes all the way back round here. He comes straight up to me and went, I'm really sorry, Chris. Is it all right if I join back in?
Yeah, when Nicky was doing this show last week, funnily enough, he never mentioned this story, but he did mention he was a bit chippy in those younger days.
Oh, he was, yeah, very. He still is, isn't he?
Yeah, he still is.
What a bloke. What a great lad.
We're almost out of time, so we always throw in a few quick questions at the end. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, best player you played with and best player you played against during your career?
Best one I played with was 100% because it just worked well for me, was when Steve signed Kenny Irons from Tranmere. I think he scored a good 20 goals for Tranmere that year when he came to Huddersfield. So he signed him to be his goal scorer, but Kenny ended up being the game dictator from midfield, which allowed me to run around and not get on the ball and get on the ball in the box and score goals. So I really enjoyed playing with Kenny. He'd play with his boots untied. Wouldn't even tie him. It was just like he's got slippers on, take the ball, ping it here, ping it there. What a great player to play with. Really enjoyed that sort of 12, 18 months to play with Kenny. The biggest runaround I've ever had, ironically, not really a massive household name, but still famous, was, I don't know, I remember going to Ipswich and playing against Jim Magilton.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get anywhere near him. But it was the way Ipswich played. Mark Venus, Tony Mowbray, so possession based back then. It was almost like Man City now, but obviously not quite as good. But when they're doing it before nobody's doing it, and we didn't know what were going on. So you've got a big Steve telling you to like kick him, get near him, follow him. You follow him, you go and stand out on the left wing, and somebody just roll into midfield and pick the ball up, and then your manager's blaming you for not being in position. You've just told me to follow him. You'd have all them conversations, but. Yeah, Jim. It's just we didn't get anywhere near Ipswich, any of the players that day, and that was probably the biggest professional runaround I'd ever had.
Just one final one, Chris. If there's one bit of advice that you maybe took from your playing days, even as manager, head coach, what one bit of advice would you give to any young up and coming player? Represent
yourself. Try and find value, that motivation and desire. Energy, it overcomes so many obstacles. It really does. You've got to have that. If you haven't got that, you only have a flit or a little bit of luck, like I mentioned before, in terms of having a chance. But if you've got them capabilities, you can respond to setbacks, because a lot of footballers do get a lot of stick for like how much they get, or the limelight that they're in, and quite right sometimes, because some don't act daft at the most inappropriate times, but often they don't. And I think that like if you've got them traits, you can deal with all them different scenarios of psychology, a crowd booing you. I remember Hartlepool fans shouting, again, a posh word for swearing, like do one, get back to Blackpool, you donkey, and all that. And I look round and I think, geez, they're our fans, not theirs. And like you got to deal with that, and the injuries and the getting dropped and all sorts. It is very, very difficult. But if you've got great motivation and desire, it overcomes so much. And you've got to be true to that, because it stands in any walk of life instead for being successful.